Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Jeff Hubbard. I'm a market president for Liberty Bank. We're a community bank with deep roots in Connecticut, like 200 years of deep roots in Connecticut. Liberty Bank is thrilled to collaborate with CBIA on the Leadership Essential Series, which engages and informs Connecticut business leaders on a range of timely topics and issues. Today's topic is compelling. Japan. Japan is a foreign direct investor in the United States, the largest, playing a major role in economics, capital investments, employment, and increasing U.S. merchandise exports. Japanese total direct investment in the U.S. hit a record in 2020 at $679 billion, including $310 billion in the manufacturing sector. Japanese investment is responsible for almost 1 million American jobs. In addition, Japan is the U.S. fourth largest trading partner and one of Connecticut's top 10 export destinations. Connecticut shipped over 405 million in goods in 2021. We have a terrific lineup of speakers for you today, and I'm thrilled you're here. Please welcome Jennifer Driscoll from Robinson & Cole, who will moderate the discussion. Jennifer, please take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Allow me to briefly introduce our panelists. First, we will hear from Counsel General, Mr. Kotaro Suzuki. Next is Mr. Kenichi Kawamoto, President of Jetro, New York. He will be followed by Daiki Nakajima, the Director of Business Development at Jetro USA. We will close the panel with remarks from Melissa Grotto, Director at U.S. Commercial Services Connecticut office. Suzuki-san, I will turn the program over to you first.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kotaro Suzuki. I'm the Consul General of Japan in Boston. It's very nice to speak in front of all of you. I assumed this post in last October, so I'm fairly new here, but still I'm already getting fascinated learning the long history of this part of the United States, which is New England. Our Consulate General, the office is based in Boston, but we are responsible to cover all the 6 states of New England, including Connecticut. One of the most important missions of our service is to assist to the Japanese companies here, but also, secondly, we are supposed to assist and promote whatever economic interaction to be done between the 2 countries. So we are keen to promote the ongoing business and potential chances between Japan and the United States, including Connecticut. So today we heard on this seminar, there would be a presentation of Japan's investment and export to the United States and its contribution in various sectors in the United States. Jetro, as you may know, is a official semi-governmental organ of ours, and they are experts of the every aspect of Japanese economic activity abroad, and also they have the vast knowledge and network back in Japan. So they are the ones who you should contact for a potential business chance with Japan. We diplomats usually tend to rely on their expertise, so please trust them. I think that the Japan and the United States has a respectively long history of various aspects of the private economic activities, and great number of companies have been active in both countries, and they also have vast knowledge and long experience about technology, about the marketing, and about the market themselves. So considering the potential of the new technology and considering the global environment now, I think that there's a great potential in the future of the further interaction between the two business communities of Japan and the US. Especially the Connecticut was, historically, I know that it was one of the dynamos of the industrialization of the United States. And the manufacturing and various sectors of finance have led the nation and the global economic scene. So today we are aware that a lot of companies in Connecticut are still very active, and it has a vibrant private sector activities. So I hope that the further promotion of or advance of the interaction between Japan and America will be accelerated from this seminar and by the capability of the Connecticut business leaders attending today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzuki-san. Kawamoto-san, we would be pleased to hear your thoughts next.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today's webinar. I'm Kenichi Kawamoto, President of Jetro, New York. It's my pleasure to introduce Jetro to the CBIA community. Jetro is a government agency of Japan that focuses on business relationships between the US and Japan. On May 6, 2021, Jetro held its first webinar with Advanced City to introduce the investment attraction in Connecticut to more than 60 Japanese companies in the US. So Governor Lamont attended live and gave us a warm opening remark regarding his experience with Japan. Since then, we had interacted with the Connecticut government and re-engaged discussions at the Select USA Summit last year. Just last month, I was visited Hartford and attended your economic summit, thanks to today's host, Joe Badbett and Jennifer Driscoll. Today, we are delighted to introduce our service and initiative to the Connecticut business community. You will hear from Daiki Nakajima on the investment dynamics of Japanese corporation in the US and how we can further collaborate to enhance the business relationships between Connecticut and Japan. Thank you, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawamoto-san. Nakajima-san, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm going to start my presentation here. So thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to introduce Japan's investment dynamics in the US. As the word says, dynamic, I hope that the numbers we showed today is relevant and intriguing to how involved the Japanese community or the Japanese corporations in the US is. I am originally from New Jersey. I've been at Jetro for 13 years now. So this has been sort of my passion to really introduce this presentation to everybody today. So what is Jetro? You've already heard from my boss, Kawamoto-san, and also the Consul General Suzuki. But Jetro is the Japan External Trade Organization. Obviously, we are headquartered in Tokyo and Osaka with 50 domestic offices in Japan, 76 overseas offices in 55 countries. So truly, truly global in terms of the information and the network that Jetro is capable of having. In the US, we have 6 locations. I'm located in New York. We have the others are in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, Atlanta, and Chicago. Our mission, simply, as Consul General mentioned, we look at everything in terms of Japan, investing into Japan, investing out of Japan, and most recently, the startup initiatives, collaboratives amongst the companies and universities, both in between the US and Japanese side. And at the same time, one of the other areas that I look at is strengthening these relationships between the state and local governments in the US with the Japanese companies. So this is where one of our strength is we host an annual survey. This will be the last survey will be the 41st survey that we've conducted since 1981. And the survey that we're going to quickly share comes from 1,841 Japanese companies, 787 out of 1,841 companies in the US. So quite dynamic in terms of the amount of information we can gather in the US. And I think this, to start this off, I think this is the sentiment that we believe continues to go trek forward, despite some of the challenges we currently face. 46% is improving from the previous year. 40% expect flat and 13% expect worse. So, we continue to see a strengthening of business sentiment in the US as an opportunity. It has been a positive trend that moves forward. In terms of future business, 50% of the companies that we surveyed are looking to expand their business in the US in the next 1 to 2 years. The main reason for this is high growth potential. And as we know, Japan has been always in the US for a long time. So we continue to see that the potential is here, and the companies are obviously expecting another positive year in terms of defining US as a marketplace. Procurement is also a big number. 50% or nearly 50% of raw materials and parts from the US are procured from the US, followed by 31% in Japan and 5% or 6%, or 5.7% in China. Out of 408 companies which have already procured in the US, 83 will expand their procurement. And out of 94 companies, just to compare, which have procured in China, only 7 expand that procurement. So you can see that the US is a strength for the Japanese community. As far as the future production sites, out of 237 Japanese companies which have manufactured their products in the US, 55 are expected to expand their facilities even more. And this is those companies here, and they will be expanding outside of where they currently are in the nation. Compared to that, out of 41 companies which have imported products from China, only 5 is expected to expand or have expanded, while 12 will reduce their facilities. So I think this also shows you the importance of the alliance between US and Japan in terms of business. Of course, it's not always the positive side. There are some negatives, but even then, the management challenges that a lot of these Japanese corporations face in the US is increasing wage of employees. This is where it's probably the most challenging. I mean, this can also range from cultural differences, but obviously it's a challenge on that end. And the rising logistic costs, followed by slow development of new customers. So, we also, not only are the positives, but we also try and identify the challenges and sort of share this amongst the states, the local community, so that we can also work hand in hand and assist in terms of how we can better this area as well. So obviously with current challenges globally as well, it is a new era between the US-Japan relationships. In terms of that, I think I'm going to articulate on 4 graphs that essentially provides how important Japan is. Obviously, the first one, Japan, as you can see here, is #1, leading foreign direct investor in the United States. Japan is #1 in the manufacturers, the amount of employees employed in the manufacturing sector. #1 in terms of exports, Japanese exports. Contributes to U.S. merchandise exports among all investors, and then also R&D capital deployment. So these crucial numbers, these are probably most important numbers you can see in terms of how the Japanese contribute to the U.S. economy. So, I mean, there's a lot of people who state they're #1s in the U.S. It's always a competition, but I think truthfully, in terms of the total amount of investment, Japan has been continued to be ranked #1. You mentioned, you heard this before. But I think the trend continues to hold. I believe we still continue to be the #1 investor in the U.S. in terms of 2022 as well. So certainly this trend continues to keep an upkeep. This is where I think it's in terms of how important it is for not just states, but for everyone to really understand, where it makes an impact. Is that the current the employees in the manufacturing center, Japan is the #1 employer to this. The total number of Americans employed by Japanese-owned manufacturing companies was 534,000 in 2020, increased 84% since 2010. And in overall, U.S. manufacturing sector only showed an increase of 5.1% during the same period. So Japan continues to employ Americans in the manufacturing center. In terms of the whole number, you've heard this before, but it's a little bit over 950,000 employees, which is also on the top level as well. Japanese companies, generate 75 billion in U.S. exports. When you look at it, I have a separate graph that kind of portrays this too, but this is significant in terms of how active the Japanese companies are locally. The 75% in merchandise exports by U.S.-based Japanese companies in 2020 is 21% of all exports from foreign affiliated companies in the United States. And then the direct investment from Japan continues to show a strong upward trend. R&D has been a major factor in a lot of the investments that we do in the U.S. So as you can see, it continues to be a trend. The current level of R&D investments indicate that U.S. innovation, engaging in the U.S. innovation process. And these numbers, we're not exact in terms of how large these companies are in terms of the actual investments, but recently in terms of innovation and the activities from the younger startups who are active in R&D have slowly traveled over and understand the U.S. market and collaborate on that front as well. So not only are investments coming from the large corporations, but a lot of interests are coming from those young entrepreneurs that are funded in Japan or even in the U.S. and willing to build an R&D facility or invest into these research in the U.S. So as I mentioned, I pointed out 4 other numbers, but this is a simple graph and again, I'm happy to share this slide with everybody, but this is a simple graph that shows, where Japan is today. And in terms of, the total FDI, the manufacturing FDI, U.S. jobs, those are close, first to compared to the others. However, as I mentioned here in the expanding the U.S. exports, this Japanese companies that essentially produce their products or make their products in the U.S. export more than close to the other top 3 combined, right? So I feel like this shows the longevity, the loyalty, the relationship building that creates more jobs in the U.S. So, happy to share this, but this is significant data that you can obviously see and share, and I love sharing this chart personally. Another significant number here is, and I'm pretty sure not a lot of people know about this, but in 2021, US-based Japanese companies now rank in the top 3 of foreign investments in all 50 states. And, all 50 states. So in fact, Japanese companies were the number 1 in 36 of those 50 states. So this is also another dynamic chart or graph image that you can tell that Japanese companies are here to stay. Japanese companies continue to invest, and they obviously have relationships with many of the states here. And finally, another quick graph here is similar. As you can see that the investments, the FDI investments, continues to be an uptrend. Despite, if you look closely, despite a lot of the crisis that happened in the US, and whether that's 2001, whether that's 2008, it continues to climb. There's a slight decline, but it shows the strength that it continues to climb. So, this significant as always. We're always happy to share these numbers in more detail, one by one. And again, our surveys, we have a lot more detail in terms of the type of questions that we ask. And I forgot to mention, in terms of that survey, finally, just to add, is that during a lot of these surveys that we took were between 2020 and 2021. And one number that I didn't mention here is that amidst the COVID, the pandemic, one of the questions we asked were, what are the retention rates of employees for your companies during that time? And about 80% of those companies responded saying that they kept all their employees during the pandemic and had minimal issues in terms of furloughing employees. So that also is another interesting number to share that we're happy to inform as well. So again, we're always we always welcome to have these for you all. But quick, dynamic. I hope just sort of keep the attention span going. I thought I'd keep it short and informative, but we pretty much appreciate having to speak here today. And thank you, Jennifer and CBIA, for having me on this panel.
Thank you, Nakajima-san. Melissa, last but certainly not least, let's hear your perspective.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer. And let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Jennifer, is that coming in?
Yes, it is.
Perfect, perfect. Well, first, thank you so much to CBIA for inviting me to present on today's program. And it's truly an honor to be speaking alongside Consul General Suzuki, Kawamoto-san, and Nakajima-san. So thank you very much. And let's dive in. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm the Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce's U.S. Commercial Service Office, based in Middletown, Connecticut. So along with my small but strong team of 2 trade specialists in the office, we cover all industries in the state of Connecticut. We work with Connecticut companies to help them to export their products. So I'm thrilled to be speaking about the importance of the Japanese market and some potential opportunities for Connecticut companies to export and partner with Japanese firms. So let's jump in. So why is Japan important? As was previously mentioned, Japan is one of the most important trade and investment partners for the United States. I know we've seen some numbers in the previous presentation. I will mention that both imports and exports increased versus 2020 as the COVID pandemic restrictions eased. I'll have some specific numbers, trade numbers, in future slides. As I mentioned on this slide, there's a lot of reasons that American companies want to partner and participate in the Japanese market. So in addition to its size and its wealth, Japanese business partners also expose American companies to new technology, to rigorous competition, and in some cases, they can partner with Japanese firms to bid on projects in third markets. I've included on the right-hand side, I've included some high-level economic stats that, and I'll be sharing the slides later, so you can dive into those at your leisure. To start with sort of the bottom line up front, Japan is a large economy, but as we'll see in future slides, its growth is not huge at this point. Its population is aging and shrinking. The top tier of Japanese firms, they are international. I have a great slide in a couple slides that shows exactly the firms who are investing here in the US. The silver lining of all of this, there are lots of opportunities in these transitions. Just a couple high-level overviews. Japan, of course, is a member of the G7, about a $5 trillion GDP, which is number 3 in the world, about 45,000 in GDP per capita, and the unemployment numbers are very, very low at 2.8%. Again, as I mentioned, Japan is the world's 3rd largest economy, behind the US and China. As I also mentioned, just digging into some of these numbers, as you can see, the red line here, in terms of percent of global GDP, we've seen shrinking from a high of 12% around 2001 down to about 5% in 2022. However, Japan's GDP has remained relatively stable between 2001 and the numbers here in 2022. As I mentioned, population is declining. The median age in Japan is about 48. With the orange line, you can see that the predictions out to 2053, we're seeing about 894,000 losses annually in Japan's population, and a steady decline from 2021 projected out to 2053. As I mentioned, and as was mentioned in previous comments, Japanese firms have invested more in the United States than firms from any other country. And these are just a handful of some of the larger names that folks on the webinar are probably familiar with who have made significant investments here in the US. I wanted to just take a quick second to talk about what's going on in Japan's energy sector. The past decade has really had some major changes, seen some major changes in Japan's power sector, especially with the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami that occurred. Big tragedy. What they are looking to do, and again, keep in mind that Japan has almost no natural resources, so most of their crude oil and LNG, coal, uranium is coming from outside of the country, and that, of course, is impacted by some of the geopolitical issues that are going on around the world. So not only does Japan need a natural resource supply, but various energy-related technologies. So again, just wanted to include that so folks can keep that in mind. I'm not going to spend I know this is a very busy slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. Again, folks will have the presentation so they can take a look. A closer look. This essentially shows the diversification of Japan's energy supply, looking at crude oil, LNG, and imported coal. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but folks can go through this at their leisure. As was mentioned before, the U.S. is Japan's 2nd largest trading partner after China. I've included some stats here. What I wanted to dig into on my next slide is since this is mostly a Connecticut audience, Connecticut trade with Japan. As was mentioned before, Japan is a critically important market, both for the US, but also here in Connecticut. So on the right-hand side of this slide, I've included Connecticut exports to Japan from 2022. These are in US millions. So you can see transportation equipment, machinery, computer and electronic products are some of the key sectors. We have 477 million of exports to Japan from Connecticut in 2022 and 264 million of imports from Japan, again, to Connecticut in 2022. So really the heart and the meat of my comments today are, as I mentioned, some of the best prospects given the macroeconomic situation happening in Japan. So again, the shrinking population that I mentioned, digitalization within the country, decarbonization, and then the outbound investment. So a couple of the sectors that I wanted to drill down, and these are sectors that my colleagues at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, again, taking a look at what's going on writ large in the country, they've identified these as some of the best sectors for U.S. exporters who are considering doing business and selling their products into Japan. So what I wanted to do is drill down a little bit into some of the sectors where there are synergies with some of Connecticut's strong suits. So I'll start with fintech. In Japan, there was a fintech center established in 2016, and the goal was to accelerate the digitalization of payments. Japanese banks have actively adopted fintech into their businesses. And importantly for Connecticut, insurtech is a leading subsector within this realm. On the aircraft and related parts sector, which of course hugely important here in Connecticut, it's important to note that US firms really have an overwhelming presence in Japan's aircraft segment. So there have been longstanding relationships with Japanese domestic manufacturers such as MHI, KHI, and Subaru, which is formerly FHI. And those US companies supply about 35% of the content, those Japanese companies supply about 35% of the content for Boeing 787. And in 2021, US aerospace products were up about 53%, were made up more than 53% of Japan's total supply. Importantly for Connecticut, some of the leading subsectors are engines and helicopters. We do both of those fabulously well here in Connecticut and have a very strong supply chain in that sector, so that's good news. On the defense side, I'll mention that, not surprisingly to the audience, the geopolitical considerations in the Asia-Pacific region are really driving Japan's demand for increased defense capabilities. So in 2023, the government of Japan's defense budget centers around 8 pillars, and that's defense capabilities, air defense, missile defense, unmanned equipment, cross-domain operations, command control, and intelligence. So definitely some opportunities for US companies in those realms. Let me now shift to the healthcare sector. So, and I'll talk both about medical devices and pharmaceuticals, again, both critically important here in Connecticut. On the medical devices side, as I mentioned before, Japan has an aging population. So what Japan's needs are, they're really centered around various diseases. So products that help with diabetes care, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, kidney disease. The government of Japan is promoting standalone medical software. They're particularly looking at digital health, telemedicine, wearable medical devices, and watch over services for the elderly. So some good opportunities there. On the pharmaceutical side, Japan is the 3rd largest pharmaceuticals market in the world and a critical export market for US pharmaceutical suppliers. So not something to be overlooked. And finally, I'll mention on the semiconductors front, the government of Japan has a strategy to revitalize Japan's semiconductor industry. So they're looking for the opportunity really to export some semiconductor equipment. Japan is the 4th largest global market for semiconductor manufacturing equipment sales. So a lot going on. I've provided a link to the country commercial guide, which again is put together by the US Embassy in Tokyo. So this really drills down into much more granular detail on these sectors as well as others. So definitely encourage folks on the webinar to take a look at that after the program. So just a couple notes on some key considerations for doing business in Japan. Their consumer economy is large, broad-based, and very sophisticated. As I mentioned earlier, Japan is highly dependent on the import of natural resources. Strong strategic alliance and deep economic integration with the United States, which bodes well for US companies looking to do business with Japanese firms, and also bodes well for advanced manufacturing, space sector, the defense sector, and the safety security sector, all of which are strong here in Connecticut, of course. Some challenges, not surprisingly, we see a lot of these similar challenges in other markets around the world. encourage Connecticut companies to take a look at what the standards are in your particular industry sector to make sure that you can meet those needs. On the regulatory side, again, not unlike many other markets around the world, some specific regulations to Japan. And sometimes prior experience in Japan is required to be successful in the market, which leads me to the green box on the right-hand side. In terms of a market entry strategy, it's really, really critical to have a partner in country. I was just reminded by LinkedIn this week that I just hit my 19-year anniversary with the Department of Commerce. And in that time, I've counseled a ton of companies here in Connecticut and across the US. And I find myself saying often, you need to have a partner. You need to have a partner, whether they're looking at Latin America or Europe, the Middle East. But I would say that in Japan, it is particularly critical to have a strong partner in that market, to visit the country frequently, and really to, it's not a transactional market, right? Relationships are critically important. So building those relationships, maintaining those relationships with your partner in country as well as potential customers is something that cannot be overlooked with the Japanese market. So companies may be asking, okay, I've done a little bit of business in Japan, or I'm looking to do more business, or I've done no business in Japan. What can I do next? This will be my 22nd commercial for the U.S. Commercial Service. So as I mentioned, we are the trade promotion arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So we have offices around the world. We have 2 offices in Japan. They are staffed by Japanese nationals, so they speak the language, they understand the cultural nuances, they understand how business is done, and day in and day out, they are out, whether they are our healthcare technology specialist or an aerospace defense specialist, they are liaising with Japanese companies, Japanese representative firms, and Japanese government agencies to understand what's going on in those industry sectors so that they can counsel US companies appropriately on the opportunities and the best strategy to sell your products into the Japanese market. So we have a variety of services for companies, from counseling to connecting you with potential partners in the market. I know I spent a fair amount of time talking about how important partnership is. We can help Connecticut companies to find an appropriate partner in the market. So I've listed our website there that goes into greater detail about some of our services. But if you're curious about the market and interested in exploring it, I would definitely encourage you to contact my office, which I'll have on the next slide. So it's myself and Tony Sargis, Jackie Torsolini here in Connecticut. We're happy to set up an introductory call with our team at the US Embassy in Tokyo to talk about your particular industry sector, to talk about what you've done in Japan, what you would like to do in Japan, and I would absolutely recommend, taking a 2-pronged approach. So working with the Department of Commerce folks, with my team in Connecticut, but also tapping into the great resources that Jetro has to offer and that the Japanese consulate in Boston has to offer. So with that, Jennifer, I'll stop sharing and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. We have a question from a member of the audience. Peter Myers asks, what are Japanese businesses looking for to invest in doing business in Connecticut? Easy shipping from our ports. Our state has many manufacturing buildings that have been left empty. Are those buildings something that Japanese businesses could be interested in revitalizing?
The simple question is a question back to this answer is, what does Connecticut have to offer in terms of business opportunities? I understand that, you have a flush, insurance industry, you have a flush life sciences industry, and then you have a lot of the manufacturing in terms of military, marine side as well. So, it's really the due diligence on the state side of what sort of industries would best fit in terms of the ecosystem surrounding Connecticut. Japanese companies are adamant in looking at opportunities. They love looking at real estate. I think proven historically, Japanese can identify some good real estate in certain areas of the nation. But at the same time, you have to also understand that Japanese companies are also shifting a lot of their logistics, a lot of their channels all over the place. It's not just centrally located anymore. Best examples are the largest of the corporations. You see many of the Mitsubishis, and you see the Sonys, or the IHIs, or the heavy industries. A lot of them are locating centrally, where there's a lot more easier access in terms of large manufacturing. The automotive, you're not going to expect a lot of that coming into the East Coast. But however, life sciences, the pharmaceuticals, biotech, a lot of that has been coming into the Massachusetts area. A lot of that has been growing in the New Jersey area. And then New York is also, focusing on that sector as well. So outside of that, it can be hydrogen, right? There's going to be a lot of initiatives in terms of hydrogen. A lot of that going on around the nation. So I think realizing, the due diligence on what Connecticut can offer, and then having that sort of branding that out, marketing that out to the Japanese community, whether if that's through us, again, we've done the webinars with Connecticut in the past. A lot of these initiatives, we have a lot of content on social media these days that can attract these interest from the companies. I'd also like to say that, as I mentioned earlier, that it's no longer the larger corporations that are investing. There's going to be a lot more smaller, medium enterprises, that has been in Japan that realized, now is the time, or, we have to make that move outside of Japan, invest more globally. Those are the companies that you have to sort of initiate. And to do that, you have to be in Japan, and you have to promote yourself in Japan too. So quick answer to that. Yeah.
Thank you, Nakajima-san. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this question?
Jennifer, I'll jump in very quickly, and I'll just mention further to Nakajima-san's comments. I know Kawamoto-san had mentioned Jetro's work with both the governor's office, the governor himself, as well as Advanced CT. So I think Pete was the person who asked the question. So definitely Advanced CT is working hard to bring in foreign investments into Connecticut.
Thank you, Melissa. So another question that I'd like to pose to the panel, and in particular our friends at Jetro, is what is the most common misstep you've seen with US companies trying to do business with Japanese companies, and what can they do to avoid this?
I think everybody has their opinions on this one. But I think, common mistakes are, there's many things to think about in terms of these relationships. It can be, Japanese corporations, like Melissa mentioned, that are internationally experienced, who you can probably have a common conversation with these days without any interference. However, there's always going to be that cultural barrier. There's always going to be a language barrier of understanding how to do these businesses, no matter, where you are. And that's not just Japan. It's any country outside of the US. There's always going to be that difference. So I think those two are the most common to sort of understand, because just because you're successfully talked to a Mitsubishi doesn't mean you're going to be able to talk to a Japanese company that just recently came to the US market with potential. So understanding those prior to any of the meetings will be, is 100% needed, I think. That's my side, but I'm pretty sure Melissa has a few comments on that too.
I agree 100%. I would say, assuming that doing business in Japan is like doing business in Massachusetts or New York or another part of Connecticut, it is not. And I would say that about doing business in France or Italy or Brazil or the UAE. So do your research, understand the Japanese market, seek guidance from the U.S. Commercial Service, from Jetro, from other experts in the field, so that you can avoid, and from other companies around the state who have done business in the market. So do your research up front.
Thank you, Melissa. Another question, Melissa, let me pose this to you. If a company is considering partnering with a Japanese firm, but would like to do additional vetting on them, are there programs that offer this?
Yeah, great question. And we often field this question from companies who have met a potential partner at a trade show or have been introduced by some other mechanism. So there are some private sector resources like Dun & Bradstreet and others. The U.S. Commercial Service does offer a due diligence background check report. It's called our International Company Profile. And essentially what we do in this instance, if the business is located in Japan, our team from the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo will go out and visit with the company. We'll interview them to get a better understanding of their company history. We will conduct a financial background check where that's feasible given the transparency in the country. And importantly, we will interview customer references of that potential partner. And then we deliver that to the Connecticut or the US company so that it's just an additional vetting mechanism. We absolutely recommend, each of your companies should have your own internal vetting procedures as well. Does the company make sense based on a particular industry that you're in, those sorts of things. But this is an additional background check that we can provide. Oh, Jennifer, I think you're on mute.
Oh, thank you very much, Melissa. And thank you for your answer. Another question for the panel, how would you characterize relations and commerce between the US and Japan under the Biden administration?
Would you like me to start, Nakajima-san?
Sure thing.
Okay. I would say that a couple phrases I mentioned earlier have continued. We still have, the US and Japan still have deep economic ties and a strong strategic alliance. I know that President Biden met with the Japanese Prime Minister back in January of this year, really to talk about bolstering the US-Japan alliance. So I mentioned the geopolitical situation in Asia Pacific. So the President and Prime Minister are working together to secure both countries' security interests in Asia. During their meeting, they discussed close economic ties between our two countries and maintaining secure global supply chains, which is on everyone's mind these days. I'll just mention that Japan is part of the Quad Coalition in Asia. The US, India, and Australia are also members, and they were formed. This group was formed to counter Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific region. And then one other piece that I'll mention, in January, there was an agreement that was formed between the US and Japan to cooperate on exploration of space. I know we have a fair number of companies in Connecticut who are doing work in the space industry as well. But would love to hear from Jetro and the Consul General's office as well.
Yeah, personally, I think that this is the, the best timing for our bilateral relationship at various levels, including the highest levels of governments. Yes, last month, our Prime Minister came over to the States and met with the president, and I remember that our Prime Minister used the word that our relationship has never been better before. So I personally totally agree with this evaluation, and thinking about the future in the mid to long term, I don't see any, negative scenario or backward. So that is my personal evaluation, as well as I think our official perception of the government. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question for our Jetro panelists. I have worked with Japanese companies for over 12 years. They have been wonderful clients to work with. But one thing that I needed to learn was the concept of ringi and how that works. I was wondering if one of our Jetro panelists could please explain what ringi is and what US companies should understand about it.
I guess I can give a quick explanation. So I mean, it's basically it's a sort of a protocol, I guess you could kind of say, to do business. Now, yes, there is a specific ringi in terms of, I think it's more common if you're trying to directly do business with somebody in Japan. Again, if you are, the Japanese companies here in the US have an understanding that this ringi sometimes doesn't work here. And again, the more, bigger corporation you are, you're going to have a more understanding of the culture in that country. So it really differentiates on the type of companies that you're trying to work with. I guess you can sort of identify it from that perspective. If you happen to be doing, even if it's a company that's really young in Japan, it's a way of, talking to somebody, getting to that person. You can't go directly to a boss or you're a CEO or somebody like that. I mean, sometimes in the sales world, it might be easiest to just go from top to bottom, but particularly in Japan, it's a bottom-up strategy, which is what a ringi is. Ringi essentially means, So and then I think you have to consider, if you're, and again, this is similar to the US too. I truly believe, but if you're a bigger corporation, you're going to have more divisions. You're going to have to find the right division before even that ringi starts, or you can apply that to a strategy. So the younger the company, smaller, it's probably a lot easier to initiate that business. So I think it's just a protocol that you definitely need to understand, but it's not going to always apply to every single company you might talk to.
Thank you, Nakajima-san. Melissa, if I could pose a question to you. If a company has not done business in Japan before, what are the best first steps that the company should take?
I would say do your research on doing business in Japan. Contact our office so that we can schedule an introductory call with our US Embassy colleagues in your particular, if you're a medical device company, for instance. So we can talk about exactly what your goals are, your objectives are, what your sales cycle looks like, who you're looking to meet with, all of those sorts of sales and marketing type questions, and pull together a strategy. And in some cases, frankly, sometimes we find that a particular country is not the right market for a company for a variety of reasons. It maybe there's too much competition, or from a pricing perspective, the US company wouldn't have legs in that market. And that's okay, because then that company can then shift their focus to a different market. So we can help you to determine whether it's the right market, and then if it is, what the best strategy would be.
Thank you, Melissa. Oh, Kawamoto-san.
Hi. My quick answer, talk to Jetro first. That's it.
That is wonderful advice. May I follow up, Kawamoto-san, with a question about exchange rates? If you or another panelist would like to talk about the impact of exchange rates on investment trends and what's going on currently.
Thank you. Actually, now it's now in depreciation rather than before, and so to direct investment for Japan is easy for American companies, and Yeah, so now it's a chance to invest in Japan. So Japan is cheap now, unfortunately, or not. I'm not sure, but anyway. So and many company had chance to investment in Japan.
Thank you, Kawamoto-san. Melissa, turning back to you. What are the specific incentives that Connecticut offers to encourage investment in the state?
Oh, Jennifer, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues at Connecticut DECD and Advanced CT, who are the experts in this. They're really they're the first group that either a non-Connecticut or a non-US company should go to, so they can definitely talk in greater detail about those items. And happy to, if there's anyone on the call who is interested in that, we're happy to put you in touch directly with Advanced CT.
Okay,
sorry to defer that, Jennifer.
No problem. So it's Advanced CT, and
they work closely with the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development on incentives for companies looking to come into Connecticut.
Great. And this is a contact you could facilitate if somebody reached out to you. Okay,
absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I think that is it for the questions from the audience at this point, but I would encourage any member of our audience to, please in these last few minutes, please feel free to post a question. Do any of our panelists have any last words of advice for members of our audience?
Jennifer, I just wanted to comment on a previous question between sort of the relationships between US and Japan. Now, I'm not on the political end of it, but certainly from a business aspect, the government, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry last year, had a joint statement with Secretary Raimondo in Japan, stating the cooperation in terms of business. That's from a large, high level collaboration, but very common. MOUs are common. MOUs are, a strength when you're trying to build that relationship with the Japanese community and a state. There are many examples of how well that worked, whether that's from a county level or even into a state level. You see the relationships between Maryland and Kanagawa Prefecture in Japan. You see, more on a smaller sister state level. New York and Tokyo are strengthening relationships. I think that's a true sign of a level where you can identify, how well the state is working with Japan, and we are able to help on that. So that's sort of the start to really engage in these business relationships. And as you can see, we're going to see more of these probably in the upcoming years as more of this relationship and alliance forms in different sectors. So just wanted to make a quick comment on that one.
Thank you, Nakajima-san. I think I speak for all our panelists in the audience when I say that we're looking forward to seeing how this unfolds. Well, if there are no further questions or comments, I believe that we are ready to close. Right. Well, thank you so much to our panelists who are busy and took the time to give us such informative presentations. We very much appreciate the information that you passed along, and it's a privilege to hear from such esteemed panelists about these important issues and, the exciting opportunities that both Japan and Connecticut offer to businesses. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Please feel free to reach out to any of us directly if you have any questions.